they have a seminar, and he's going to be speaking and doing a bit of a workshop on how you can get information from your own community, from government, an open government seminar tonight. And thanks for coming back this morning, Bob. I appreciate it. I know we had you yesterday, but we're intrigued here.
2 days in a row. Are we lucky or what?
This is big time. This is big.
So I'm excited about tonight, and it's open to everybody. And as I said yesterday, I will stay. It starts at 6 o'clock. I'll stay until there are no more questions.
So when you talk, I mean, this is big. Open government for you. Information available to the people is extremely important, and sometimes I really think we just take it for granted and we don't fight for it when it's right there for us.
I think that's accurate.
Yeah.
And the law, the Freedom of Information Law, known by so many as FOIL, provides extremely broad rights of access. And very basically, the law is based upon common sense. All it really says, all it should ever say, in my opinion, is that every government record is available unless disclosure would hurt. Either somebody in terms of an invasion of privacy, the government in terms of its ability to do its job well on behalf of the public, or sometimes a private company in relation to its competition.
Let me ask you, because that part where it says that would prevent you from conducting proper governmental business for the nation, the state, the municipality. Wouldn't it be easy for somebody to say, like, for instance, and I think Nixon even tried this back in the day, that that information is going to cause a huge disruption for the nation. It's not good for the country, so we're not going to allow this information out. I know FOIL wasn't necessarily the way that was done, but what prevents somebody from using that strategy and saying, I'm sorry, you can't have this information?
Well, you look at the law, and it has exceptions. And unless a record falls within the scope of an exception, it has to be disclosed. And you might remember, I don't know if you're old enough to remember, the phrase executive privilege. Nixon and others have relied upon, generally speaking, what has become known as executive privilege, where the contention is that disclosure in some way would be detrimental to the public interest. Well, we don't have executive privilege in New York. We can't simply stamp it confidential and have it be so. Either there's an exception in the law or there isn't. And again, most of the exceptions are based upon the potential for real harm should a record be disclosed.
Got it.
Bob, I remember going back, boy, this might have been 5, 6, 8 years ago. You were in the city of Utica doing a presentation, and many local officials were touting all the information that you provided about how to go about foiling. You've been involved in this for a long time. What piqued your interest in this? You are like the champion of freedom of information. How did you get involved in this?
Well, the truth is sometimes you just get lucky. I am, old. I'm old. I went to school. I went to college in the 60s, and, we were fairly nasty in the 60s, but we were idealistic. And I went to law school and came out of school and was looking for a job, got a job with the state, and, it was a typical state agency, lowest level attorney job. And in May of 1974, this new law passed, the Freedom of Information Law, and it created a new office with no budget. So the governor's office, and then it was Governor Malcolm Wilson. I don't know how many people even know that name.
I do not.
I don't either.
Wow.
Well, I'm showing my age, I suppose.
Yeah.
But Governor Wilson called around to various state agencies and said, who can you loan temporarily to get this new office off the ground? And I, being the lowest on the totem pole, was one of those people called. And there are some things you never forget. When the guy called, he said, are you willing to work for this new office? It was called then the Committee on Public Access to Records. And I said, what will you be doing? He said, well, we'll be dealing with the Freedom of Information Law. I said, I don't know anything about it. And he said, that's okay. Nobody else does either.
Wow.
But the reality is, and you know this, the law is based upon idealism. It's based upon democratic principles. It is completely consistent with those ideals that we were fighting for in the late 60s and early 70s.
Now, let's talk about FOIL and where we would be. Just what was accomplished in the last 2 years alone that would not have come to the surface had it not been for our ability to FOIL information. Buffalo Billions would be one, right?
I would think so.
What else? I mean, there's been many. I mean, Preet Bharara, for instance, is just on the attack when it comes to corruption in New York. But without freedom of information, some of the stuff never would have come to fruition here.
You know, the truth is that John and Jane Q. Public have the same rights as, for example, a member of the news media. But the reality is that reporters often will request records that the public in general will not ordinarily seek. The news media has the opportunity to do what needs to be done to find out what the government is up to, let's say on a broader basis than the average person. You or your neighbor might go to the town hall or request records online to find out whether your real property tax assessment is fair. But the reporter, in that case, in the Buffalo Billions case, it's a reporter named Jim Heaney from a group called the Investigative Post, and it made requests for records, which I think opened the door to the investigation by Pre-Barara. Downstate, we see situations involving the mayor of New York City, and I'm not saying he's a bad guy, but I'm saying that he doesn't quite, in my opinion, understand the Freedom of Information law, and there have been issues involving email communications with his friends. There have been issues involving access to police records, and we would not have found out about these things but for the use of the Freedom of Information law.
Yeah, yeah.
So you talked about their emails, de Blasio emails with friends, etc. Of course, one of the biggest issues in this presidential debate has been Hillary's emails. What are your thoughts on a Secretary of State's personal emails, her work emails? Do you have an opinion on that, whether or not we should have access to it? Obviously, WikiLeaks is dumping things left and right.
Well, I'd like to approach this from a little bit different angle. First of all, there is a Federal Freedom of Information Act which applies to federal agencies only. New York has its Freedom of Information law. Every state has some sort of an access to records, and they're all different. It's unfair in so many instances to compare the law of one jurisdiction to the next. But one of the distinguishing features of our law in New York is that it has told us what a government agency record is since 1978. And the truth is, when we were drafting amendments to our first version of the Freedom of Information law, passed in 74, we looked at the Federal Act and we tried to correct its deficiencies. And one of those deficiencies was that the federal law has never told us what a government agency record might be. Well, since 1978, FOIL has applied to all government agency records and has defined the term record to mean any information in any physical form whatsoever.
Yeah.
Kept, held, filed, produced, or reproduced by, with, or for a government agency, a county, a city, a town, a village, a state agency, a school district. If it exists in some physical form and it's maintained by or for the government, it's covered by FOIL. So if the mayor of Utica goes home, sits down at his home PC, uses his personal email address, and communicates with whomever relative to his functions as mayor of the city of Utica, that email communication is a record that falls within the coverage of FOIL. Whether it's public or not, as in every other instance, is dependent upon its content.
Right.
The other point that I've made many times in relation to WikiLeaks, among other similar stories, the federal government classifies millions and millions of records every year. When WikiLeaks first became known with Julian Assange a couple of years ago, didn't the public know that Iran was planning to build a nuclear bomb? It wasn't a secret.
Right,
I think that we classify way too much, and I think that that's been overlooked. Many of the emails, I'm guessing, and I have no idea what the contents are, that fall within the thousands that have been the focus of attention involving Secretary Clinton. Many of them, like most emails, are absolutely innocuous. I would guarantee it.
You know, it's there's a reason why you see politicians when they're carrying one cell phone and then they're carrying another, one in right hand, one in the left hand, because one thing that they can't do is mix their political campaigns with their actual politics and with the job of doing the business of the government. So when these campaign emails come out where they're strategizing in the campaign, should that have been off? I mean, normally that would not fall under FOIL, would it?
No, I mean, if there's a campaign committee, which is usually a separate entity from the government,
right,
they can do whatever they want, just as you can. Just as I can in my private life.
But if they start mixing with their government email, the campaign email, all of a sudden that becomes fair game.
Then it becomes different, doesn't it? And that was one of the issues that's come up in New York City involving the mayor. And years ago, as early as 1980, the state's highest court used a phrase that has come up many times. The court referred to considerable crossover between the functions of so-and-so as a private citizen and that person's functions as a government official.
Yeah.
And it's become increasingly difficult to draw a line between the two.
I want to come back, quick break, and we'll come right back with you. We're talking to the one and only Bob Freeman, who
one and only.
You really are. You're somebody who stands for freedom of information, the process, and our real rights here as New Yorkers and Americans as well. But I want to ask you about, somebody's asking me to ask you about FOIL and Mexico. Sit tight. We'll come back with the answer to that one. Also, body cameras. You have a little knowledge on that issue as well. We'll come right back. Bob Freeman with us on WIBX.